The interpreters have been having some issues with their links, so some of them are coming in the back end.
Okay. So
And
now
it doesn't matter, even if all this junk is on the recording, I'm clipping all the recordings before I post them. Oh, see, here comes some attendees coming in. Okay.
Perfect.
So you're on and you're live. People are coming in.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and mute. Thanks so much for all your help.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Claudette.
You're welcome. Hello. Good morning, everyone. We will be starting in about 5 minutes. Good morning. If you're just joining us, we will be starting in about 2 minutes. You guys are already blowing up the chat saying good morning from across the country. So excited to see you all this morning. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be, and welcome. I am Brooke Wilson. I am a board member for April and the facilitator of today's call. Thank you for joining us for this workshop. Dear SILs, here's what to expect from your SILC and other messy stuff. We have our two presenters, Kathy Cooper, who's the Executive Director of the SILC in Kansas, and Amy Heighton, who is the Executive Director of the Topeka, what is it called? Independent Living Resource Center. So the center there in Kansas as well. A few housekeeping items. It's also showing on the screen. If you scroll over the menu bar, we should all be pros at using Zoom by the end of this week. But if you scroll over the screen, a menu bar will pop up depending on what device or what you're using. It will be either at the top or the bottom of the screen. This is where you will find the closed captioning for today's session. In addition, we will put the stream text link in the chat box. For sign language interpreters, we do have those available today, and they will be on the main screen. If you do not see the interpreter, please make sure that you are in gallery view, and that will allow you to see more than one person at a time. And we will try to minimize the number of people shown on the screen by turning off our cameras. Most of you have already found the chat, but in order to find the chat, in the same menu, there is a little word bubble. And if you click on that, you can join in the discussion. Everyone's saying hello and what the weather's like where they are. For Q&A though, we would really encourage you to use the Q&A box, which is also found in the menu. It looks like two word bubbles and it says Q&A. The chat tends to move fast and we don't want to lose your questions. To ask a question or a comment, please use that feature. You can also raise your hand, which is also in the menu, and we will unmute you so that you can ask a question in that manner. If you are calling in by phone, you'll have to use that, and you can use *9 to raise your hand. So if you are using the unmute option, please try to minimize your background noise so that we can hear you. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kathy and Amy.
Well, thank you. It's so intriguing to me to see all the different people that are joining from all the different states, centers, and SILCs. And it's a little nerve-wracking at the same time because as I'm sitting here watching them flow through, I'm seeing some of my past chairs, some of my current board members, and people that I've worked with as a peer mentor. So, I don't know why that makes me nervous, but it does a little bit. So thank goodness I have Amy Heighton here to help me because she's a pro, and that's pretty much why I asked her to join me on this presentation. I'm hoping that everybody asks a lot of questions, so it's not just us here talking at you the whole time. So we really do want questions. I'll let Amy go.
So hi, my name is Amy Heighton, as Brooke said. So just my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'll provide a sort of a brief description. I am actually sitting currently in a hotel room in DC. I have long hair that used to be black with gray, but now is gray with black. After 17 years at Topeka Independent Living Resource Center, I guess that's what you get. So I have brown hair, olive complexion. I'm wearing a black t-shirt that says "Our Homes, Not Institutions." So that's, and I want to thank Kathy for inviting me to have this discussion. I think kind of the idea that sort of behind the workshop itself was that across the past year and a half, couple of years, Kathy and I have had several opportunities to have these kind of conversations together and talk. I think I've been around the independent living movement and Center for Independent Living for many years. And and then within the past year and a half have moved into the position of executive director. So, and so across that time period, we've had opportunities to talk about and review the direction that our statewide independent living council and our centers have taken in the state of Kansas sort of through the years. And so we thought that it might, hopefully will be beneficial for other folks to sort of be able to participate in that kind of a conversation. Kathy has, with her involvement with the National SILC organization has, and her history of mentorship and mentoring in the SILC network has a lot of perspectives and a lot of different ideas and things that she's seen from SILCs around the country and the way that they, sort of operate in their states. And so we thought it would be a good chance for us to review that and sort of talk about the different factors that get SILCs and centers, that sort of define those relationships and how they work together. So I guess that's at least my perspective on what we're going to do here today, or hopefully what we're going to try to do. So I don't know. So that's where we're at.
All right. Well, like I said, Amy's way better at this than me. I didn't describe anything, so I'll back up just a little bit. I am in a very cluttered room. You can see suitcases. It's like I'm ready to go on vacation at any point. So, but again, it's very cluttered. I have blonde hair that is in desperate need of some professional help with the roots. But other than that, what we hope to do today is kind of help make the relationship between SILCs and CILs a little better if it's not already. In Kansas, I feel like we have a good relationship. The SILC and the CILs, they come together quite often. We do this thing we call IL network meetings, and it's where I call the meeting, but I am just really kind of the facilitator to kind of get the meeting rolling, to ask questions, get the conversation started. All of the center directors are invited, and most generally they all always come. Sometimes there's, things that happen and somebody can't come, but we do these meetings in person, not over the phone. We have found that you get much better participation when it's in person, because the directors are busy, and I understand that. I'm busy, I get it, and if we're on the phone, we try and do other things. So that that in-person, face-to-face has really been beneficial. And we've talked about some pretty tough things that we don't talk about on a normal basis in Kansas. So, things like formula funding, what we'd like it to look like. We'll probably start talking about territories and what that looks like in our state, whether or not we're truly serving all the counties. Those kind of tough discussions, but they have to happen in order to make your state better. And if you don't have a good relationship between your SILC and your CILs, you really can't have those conversations. A little background on Kansas. We're a minimally funded state through Part B. We have 10 centers. Of those 10 centers, 6 receive Part C, and 4 receive Part B or state general funds or some other type of concoction of funds to keep them running. Our SILC is a 1-person staff, myself. Let's see. Again, we're a very rural and frontier state, so we have to look at a lot of area. One center, I think, has 38 counties. That's a lot of counties to cover. So very different types of communities that our centers deal with. We have some big metropolitan areas, not as big as other states, but we have a couple of big metropolitan areas that some centers cover. So that's kind of where we're coming from on this. I don't know, Amy, anything else about Kansas?
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's a great, sort of description of kind of the landscape of the centers. I mean, I think it is also, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are, who've been familiar with, our SILC, primarily because the person who sort of organized the SILC and has been, and for many years was the executive director was Shannon Jones. And so in some sense, it's been interesting because, we went from having, sort of this one person who was, very much sort of, the definition of how, we saw the statewide independent living council work in our state. And then we've had sort of transition issues with respect to our state government and the perspectives on how the DSE, for example, the designated state entity in our state, felt that SILC ought to be functioning. And then this all sort of converged right around the same time that the transition happened from the Department of Education to the Administration on Community Living and the implementation of WIOA. And so, having a good relationship and engage, having this conversation on an ongoing basis about, what is the role of the SILC, and what are the expectations from the many different constituencies that SILCs have to negotiate. The CILs, of course, being one of those constituencies, right? I mean, in some sense, even though the statewide independent living councils are these autonomous organizations, there is this expectation of a relationship of some sort with the designated state entities, right? And then passing through that, the Administration on Community Living, SILCs, have their own independent board of directors as well. And then their constituencies as Centers for Independent Living. And from my perspective, I actually regard the statewide independent living council as also having a broader constituency, that sort of being all folks who are engaged in the independent living movement and independent living services in the state. And so there's, I have a great deal of sympathy. I mean, as obviously, as a center director, right. I mean, I do have to keep my funders happy. My center is the only center in the state of Kansas that does not accept any state funding. So I have less concern about keeping the DSE happy. But, obviously you've got the Administration on Community Living, my consumers, and my board of directors. I mean, those are my, those are the people I have to keep happy. Kathy has all those folks and then some. So, I'm not trading your jobs anytime soon. So.
So I think that maybe just one of the most basic things to convey in this is, what is the SILC's role? What's its purpose? Why are we even here? And so I'm going to go to the boring stuff, but it's really important stuff. And, that's the Rehab Act, Section 705. It talks about the statewide independent living council. And I think all SILCs should know this so well, that they should be able to quote it or find it or look at it, because it really is our job description as a SILC. It talks about how we're, comprised, who we have to have on our board. It talks about the qualifications of those people. It talks about the terms. And then more importantly, or as importantly, it talks about the functions or the duties of the council. And I think this is good for CILs to know as well, because it could clear up some questions or, issues that some states are having. So it talks about our duties. The biggest duty we have is the development of that state plan. And, so it goes into who's supposed to be a part of that. It's not just the SILC that develops the state plan. It is also the centers. And, a little more detail on that, it's the directors of the center. If you look at the CFR 45, and let's see, I had to write it down because I can't ever remember all the numbers. 45 CFR 1329.14, 15, and 16 are really the big ones to take a look at, because it talks about, again, the duties of the SILC, that you have to have a SILC in your state or you can't draw down Part B and Part C money. That's why it's so important that SILCs always be in compliance with their board and who has to be on the board and all that. So that's important. But these will give you the blueprint of why the SILC is in here, what they're supposed to do. We have to meet regularly. We meet once a quarter. That's not I think that's at least a best practice, but some SILCs meet more often. We have to help with this, I want to call it the 704, but it's the PPR report. There's one that Part C centers do, and then one that the state does. We help the DSE with that and they turn it in, or we turn it in. It's so convoluted how it can be done, but we have to help with it. Coordinating activities, and that can mean so many different things. And then there's authorities that SILCs have, and those are just extra stuff that now we can do. One of the things that we can't ever do is provide independent living services. So that's important. That's one of our limitations. So it's good to know that it's all there. It's all in the Rehab Act. It's all easy to find. But one other thing that I always, when I talk to other SILCs, and I'm kind of helping people who maybe are new to this job or coming up, one of the biggest things after I tell them to go look here, and of course at the uniform guidance, but so section 725, well, Part C, section 725, under the assurances for centers, number 12, I think is a big one and an important one for SILCs to know, but also for centers to maybe revisit. Because that's the one that says that centers are supposed to give us their grant application, which I don't think a lot of people knew. That one was kind of new to me. But anyway, in the annual PPR, it's important for the SILC to have that so that we can use it as piece of the evaluation and monitoring of the state plan for independent living. And we'll get into the whole what that really means, because sometimes some SILCs don't understand that part of their duties all too well, and that's gotten into a lot of relationship troubles between SILCs and CILs. So I feel like I've talked a lot. I want to let Amy jump in here. Oh, unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah, I know. I pushed mute, and then I was like, so. Yeah, I think sort of to sort of go along with that. I mean, so obviously this will probably seem like a surprise, but I actually did prepare for today's. And so, in so doing, sort of I looked at and had spent some time thinking about, and sort of the things that Kathy was referring to. There are certain things that the statewide independent living council, it says shall do, right? And those kinds of things related to the spill, development and monitoring and reviewing of the spill, keeping records, having meetings. And then this additional shall would be to coordinate activities with other entities in the state that provide services similar to or complementary to independent living services. And so when I talked about having sort of that broader constituency, sort of having, to me, that's where that sense comes in, is, sort of having a perspective on, in our state, what does the developmental disabilities or the community mental health services, look like, and, who are engaged with those services, and, and kind of keeping a sense of how that works and coordinating that. So you have your shalls, right? I mean, not to get too lawyerly on folks. And so that's what you got to do. But then we move into this sort of less cut and dried area where it is, so your statewide independent living councils then they have these other, and so the types of activities that Kathy was talking about at the end, sort of the last part there, and so from the statute, it's the council may work with centers for independent living to coordinate services, to improve services provided to people with disabilities. The council may conduct resource development activities to support independent living services by the centers. And the council may perform other functions as the council deems appropriate. And so these are, I mean, and so again, to get back to, I think probably the underlying theme that we have here for today is this notion that that really things are going to work best if the centers and the SILC see themselves in a partnership. You know, if you have a center, if you have a statewide independent living council, and the only resources that have been made available to that council gives you one FTE, gives you one person, then looking at all of these May activities, resource development, you know, kind of all of these other things, that becomes a lot less possible. You know, if we, if centers haven't helped the SILC, you know, advocate for the resources that they need to be able to accomplish those things. Sorry. All right, well, there's a few questions, and actually, we're good with starting to answer those at any point in time. Sorry, that's the part that I'm super bad at.
Yeah, I just took a break here and started a break, and I was looking at the questions and answers, and I thought, oh crap, they're building up. So yeah, let's go ahead and start answering some of those.
Go. First one is for Kathy. It's, does your SILC conduct background checks prior to sending their application to the governor's office?
Well, by background checks, what we do is we have our own membership application that a person would fill out, and if one of the board members does not know the person that is applying for our board, then I will call them and kind of interview them just to make sure they understand what independent living is and they have that philosophy, and just to kind of see if they, you know, meet any of the other check marks that we're looking for. But as far as a background check, like criminal background check or credit background check, no, we don't do any of that at the SILC. However, our governor's office, they have an extensive questionnaire or application that somebody fills out to be on any board for the state of Kansas, and they do look at a lot of that stuff. I don't know how thorough of a criminal background, but they do look at a lot of it. So there's the answer to that one.
Second one, is there an ARC in Kansas or in some of the metro areas? So, and I'll just take it. There is no, we do not have a statewide ARC. We do have a local ARC chapter in Lawrence, Kansas. And yeah, and they are some of our favorite people. So, but yeah, we don't have a statewide ARC. So the next one would be a Kathy question. Is it best practice steps for jointly approving the Part B/SILC PPR prior to submission? And does your DSE submit it, or does the SILC ED prepare and submit it?
Well, gosh, this really depends on the state as far as what the best practice is. In my opinion, I think the best practice is that, yeah, you jointly, you jointly put that PPR together. The way our state does it is, they fill out all of they get the information from the state centers that don't receive Part C funding. And like I said, I think there's 4 of those, and they put it all together in a spreadsheet and then put in the data elements into the report. And then the SILC, I'm going to say me for that, but I fill out a lot of the information as far as, you know, coordination of services, and are we, you know, how have we met the state plan for independent living, and then of course all the SILC information. I do all that, but I also go and I look at theirs, because quite honestly, in our state, we have gone through quite a few what they call IL program managers that are the person that our DSE kind of uses to manage our grants that we receive from them to get the Part B money and any other funding that comes through. So the DSE is actually the one who, let me think if this is right, it's changed a couple of times. they put it all into the system, and then I actually hit the submit button. So I go through and I check everything. I mark that I've checked it, and then I am the one who actually hits submit. But I think it can be done either way. I don't think that the SILC should do the entire report, because I think, I think the DSC should do some of that work. And then it is very handy because they have this spreadsheet that I can then use that breaks down all the centers, and where, how many people they're serving, and how many, what types of disabilities, just that data breakdown. It's kind of nice to see and have. And then I use a lot of that for my annual report that I put out that shows some of that stuff and much more. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, the next question is, how does one SIL serve 38 counties? Do they have one main office and several satellites?
Well, and you jump in and help me on this. They have one main office. They used to have satellite offices in a couple of different areas. It is a huge piece of the state. It is basically, it's the western, I'm looking at a map above me right now. It's the western portion it's just a huge piece of the state. So, they send people out. There's a lot of windshield time. This is one of those things where when I say that we need to look at our territories, and in Kansas, we say all 105 counties are served. We have no unserved counties. However, do we have underserved counties? Absolutely. And, regardless of who the center is that covers it, when you have that many counties, it's just hard to cover such a huge portion of the state. And we're talking a lot of miles. If you've ever seen Kansas on a map, it's pretty long. So we have a lot of underserved counties that we will be taking a look at, I think, over the course of the next spill.
Yeah, and in some sense, those 38 counties, there are, a few of them here and there that receive where other centers are contracted to provide other types of services in those areas, if that makes sense. And so like employment services, for example, I do know that one of the other centers, a number of those 38 counties, even though they're technically in the IL service area of one center, actually get contract for employment services with a different center. So there's some aspect of it that is, I get by with a little help from my friends, right? But also, I think to Kathy's point, this is really, fundamentally, just to be as frank as possible, the answer is that people have to be willing to trust each other enough to be honest about what our capacities are. And quite frankly, that trust needs to be born of the idea that we're going to work together to make sure that we get enough resources so that those 38 counties actually are meaningfully receiving services. And that's the hard part. That's the hard part of this whole thing. And so that's, David, I think you probably reached right in there and put your finger on a nerve with that question. So,
but that's one of the important things of why the SILC has to be able to call all of the centers together and say, hey, let's have this discussion. So you have to have a good relationship with your centers. And you know what? I know not all those center directors love me. They don't all think of me as their best friend, but I'm okay with that because we can still have that professional relationship. But I think that is a main responsibility of your SILC, and it's very hard to do. I think it helps. I will say, I think it really helps though that I have worked for Centers for Independent Living. I have done almost every single job you can do at a Center for Independent Living. And I've dealt with home and community-based services, which is a big piece of what centers do. I think that helps, because it gives me a little bit of Well, I feel like the directors know that I know a little bit about what I'm talking about, just a little bit, but I think that helps. But yeah.
Well, I mean, and I do think that leads us kind of into this last question from Stephen, is what can be done to improve a disjointed relationship between centers and the SILC and the DSE? And I think if David hadn't already touched a nerve, I think Stephen is probably hit on the heart of the matter here as well. So if you want my opinion, I mean, and this is sort of how, I come to this work from a pretty strong background in community organizing and a pretty ferocious commitment to consumer direction. And so, quite honestly, that's really where I always am going to take things back. And so the answer is if the needs and the choice and the dignity and the freedom of people with disabilities is guiding the things that are happening in your state, even people who don't get along with each other or who have trouble with each other, eventually are going to get to the same place. Right. And so to me, generally, if there's a breakdown in that relationship, it's because one or more of the parties have sort of taken their eyes off of that agreed upon concept, which is fundamentally, we're here to serve people with disabilities and to help people get the tools and resources they need to advocate for their integration into the community. And if in sort of the work that we do together, we can always sort of pull it back to that, even though there may be disagreements about whose job it is to do what, we all have to make sure that we're at the outset all agreeing on the job that needs to get done. And so it's not an easy answer. But that's what I go back to. And quite frankly, as centers, as a SILC, that's where we get we're protected that way. That is, that is our single greatest strength, is that really everything we do is just supposed to be guided by those consumer directed principles. And if we're doing that, even if the DSE is doing what DSEs do, right? They're being bureaucracies. That's what they're there for. But if we tell that bureaucracy, and if we reinforce time and time again to that bureaucracy, you are answerable to the same people that we are answerable to, because they are, and our job is simply to, sort of amplify those voices and to use the knowledge and the access that we have to help those voices get the services and supports they need so that our communities are integrated. So I don't know,
and I think it helps. This is where it's very important for a SILC to be autonomous. If the SILC's not autonomous from the DSE, you won't have that respect. And we struggled with that in Kansas for quite some time. And it was very helpful when ACL did come around and say, nope, SILCs have to be autonomous. And you'll see in this spill phase that we just got through, writing, it was very important. It was very pushed that the SILC had to explain how they were autonomous. And I think that helps in situations like that, because you can say all day long that, well, you just have to have a good relationship with your DSE. You just have to have a good relationship with your DSE. Well, it's not always up to you. And sometimes you got to push back, and that autonomy is there to help you with that. But I think it's also important that your network has to understand that your peers, the CILs are peers to the SILC, the SILC is peers to the CILs, the DSE is a peer to the SILC and to the CILs, and you have to have that understanding. But that's a hard conversation to have, but you have to be willing to have it. And people have to be willing to put all of the BS out there and not be territorial on certain things. And then you can do that. So that kind of is like a drawn out, but I guess we'll go to the next question.
No, I mean, I think, and it's the same kind of the question is, what should be the relationship between the SILCs, SILs, and public in the development of the spill, and who should lead the charge?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like this is kind of answered in the regs. That's one of the primary duties of the SILC is to develop the spill. So I feel like the SILC should lead the charge and kind of make sure that the process is happening. Now, by no means do I mean that the SILC has a bigger piece of the voting pie or any of that kind of stuff, because we don't. It takes those three elements of signatures, the SILC, the SILs, and the DSE. So I think the SILC should lead the charge. They should facilitate. They should get out there, do the public meetings, do all that kind of stuff. But you absolutely have to have the center directors helping you. And we're very fortunate in Kansas that the way we did our spill, I had all of the SIL directors come. It was absolutely amazing. Every single SIL director came. They could also bring some staff if they wanted. We had a room of like 16 people, and we sat there for an entire day and put that spill together and agreed on every single piece of that spill. And so it's easy to get signatures that way.
Yeah, I mean, this is Amy, and I think that the way that the way we've started to develop the spill has it's changed kind of through the years as well. And I mean, the reality is that the SILC doesn't provide independent living services. They don't have consumers, right? They don't have, quote unquote, public. And so really it is dependent upon the centers to regard their role in the development of the spill as a partnership and to provide that input opportunity for constituencies, for consumers, for, the public to be participants in that spill process. I mean, and again, so Kathy, through the years, we've had, public input sessions and things like that. And so, I mean, it isn't necessarily that I'm carrying the water, for our consumers, but we're also giving them an opportunity to actively participate in the process as well. So that's, so how do you feel SILCs and SILs, what do you feel SILCs and SILs can do to publicize our mission? Most citizens do not know what we do. Amen, Jack.
Yeah, that's tough.
Well, I mean, and so again, getting back to kind of the whole shall and may, right? I mean, and I can tell you that like for our state, our statewide plan for independent living has included a specific, sort of goal around outreach, for the past, at least the past, I think probably 4 or 5 years. And so, yeah, I think number one, nothing happens by accident, right? And so it's funny because I mean, for 17 years, right, I've been hanging around Topeka Independent Living Resource Center. And, for years, I was the person who was completing our 704 report. And so for a long time, it was like, I felt like when I sat down in November or whenever to do our 704 report, there was the things that my center did, right? So here's the statistics, here's the vignettes, here's all of this. And then sort of at the end, I looked at the spill and was like, okay, how do I fit the things that we did into the objectives of the spill? I mean, it was this sort of backwards process. And through the past few years, as we've changed sort of that process of the development of the spill, it's become more of I do a lot less of that retrofitting and a lot more of that intentional stuff sort of as we go along. And so I think, outreach is a prime example of that, of the need to have the car drives the directions that your eyes are pointed. And if you feel like publicity and outreach is an important thing, then your spill should reflect it. And you should have sort of concrete and measurable goals and ways to work together to put that forward. I mean, one thing that Kathy has done well is, you know, for the past is that when she gets that 704, well, whatever it is, the PPR, when she gets that report, you know, she does prepare, you know, sort of like a little one pager that we, you know, and makes that available so that we can, you know, we can put that out. You know, here's what Centers for Independent Living did in the state of Kansas. Here's the number of people that, you know, moved out of institutions. Here's the number of people who got employment. You know, here's the number of kids that we helped transition from high school to their next steps. I mean, those types of things have been, you know, are helpful as well to kind of start to tell that story about what it is that we do. Let's see. So this one's going to like, okay, your take on the role of the SILC and CILs in developing a plan for how new Part C, Part B, and state funding should be distributed among CILs. Seems to me what Rehab Act is telling us is that we need to work together to strengthen the network of centers. So if there are some very underfunded centers, should the CILs and SILC be looking for ways to give them additional new funds to make sure they're viable, which would then mean that some of the other CILs would not get some of the new funds. Not talking about reallocating any current funding, but perhaps how do we allocate new funding when it comes in to help CILs that are vulnerable due to very low funding?
Well, I'll just jump in real quick here because Amy, you probably have a better answer than I do, but I will say this is one area of the spill that I feel we were rock stars on. We came in and because of those network meetings that we had previously, we came up with the formula that we felt was fair. And we did that by looking at like population of the counties and also mileage or whatever. And then we weighted that. It was like a 60-40 weight. And we said, if any new funding comes in, this is what we want used, but only after centers are all at the same base level. And we determined a base level that everybody was comfortable with. And so we've had that hard discussion. And I think that's when those network meetings are so important because, again, looking at that piece of Kansas that is so big, covered by one center, would that be a perfect area for a new center to come in? Possibly. But we also looked at other areas that are already covered by centers and what the percentage of people with disabilities that they were serving. And that was huge. It was actually very shocking to know that some of our established centers in metropolitan areas were covering such small percentage for whatever reason, not even going into that, but just, you know, it's a very good thing to do to put that type of data together. And Amy was a huge piece of that. I like to think, well, I called everybody together and, you know, had the conversation, but Amy got the data. She put it together. She even color coded it. It was wonderful. But, you know, that's a huge piece of it. Because then only can you say, here's an unemotional approach to how do we give centers funding? How do we fund new centers and all that kind of stuff? So that's.
Yeah, I mean, but like, I mean, what Kathy's talking about isn't a hypothetical. I mean, you know, what actually happened, well, what actually happened was, you know, our state came and said, hey, we've got some more money and how should we divide it out? And, you know, and so it really did, I mean, you know, sort of going back to that, that original question about, you know, the relationship between, you know, how do you navigate that relationship between CILs, DSE and the SILC, is that, you know, it was sort of the ability for us all to kind of set down egos and focus on, you know, how are people being served and how can we recognize that the barriers to providing independent living services are vastly different for somebody that's providing services to 38 counties versus my center. I mean, literally, so I'm the only federally funded center, but I am also the only center in the state that has one county. and one county only. And so, and so to me, it doesn't, it's an academic exercise, which maybe is why, I felt perfectly comfortable coming in and stomping all over it. I don't know, but, but, the reality is that I'm perfectly willing to admit, that, I don't have to worry about windshield time. I can literally make it from one side of my county to the other side of my county in 25 minutes and feel very much like I can see where we're underserving people and where we could be doing better, and recognize that those barriers are completely different from somebody who literally has to drive 120 miles to get from one corner of their service area to the other. And try to find resources, housing, in rural communities, employment, sort of all of those barriers. And so, so I guess with respect to the question about, new funding is, I think that, really building trust and setting up a conversation in a way that is, what is best, would it be best to put in a new center, or how can we, or what does sufficient funding look like in a formula that sees to it that the existing center can serve the existing, area. That just is a conversation that people have to get themselves to be okay to have. So, oh, here's one of our favorite questions. It's one of my favorite questions.
This is the best part. This is the best
exactly.
part.
This is the part this is the part that Kathy's like, hell no, I don't want to try to monitor these assholes. So our DSC feels that the SILC is supposed to monitor the CILs. In spite of trying to educate them that they're not, they constantly refer back to RSA and the need for monitoring. What do you recommend for us to do to help educate their Department of Vocational Rehabilitation about the role of the SILC?
Oh, well, hopefully you feel like you're autonomous from your DSE. If you're not, that's a big place to start, because quite honestly, I think the regs are so clear on this that we're not here to monitor the centers in any way, shape, or form. We're here to monitor and evaluate the state plan for independent living, and that is a very distinct difference. I would hopefully your DSE joins in on some of those ILRU calls. ILRU has these calls that they do for centers, they do them for the SILC, and they do them for the DSE. And I would highly recommend that your DSE get signed up for that, and because they're going to hear the answer to that there as well. You can also go right back to those regs and point out what it says that the SILC's responsibilities are. You just have to be firm on it. You have to go back to the law, go back to, this presentation, and just say in absolutely no way, shape, or form are SILCs responsible, or would we ever want them to monitor the CILs, because that's just not our responsibility.
Yeah, I do think, it is always interesting to me that, like the DSE, because I think it looks like in that state, the same as it is in Kansas. Our DSE, they're not just money handlers, right? They also supervise direct services, through the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. So they actually bring more perspective on those aspects of service delivery than the SILC, where it very specifically says, in the law, the SILC doesn't provide direct services. So why in the world would somebody who doesn't do the thing, be the people that you want monitoring and supervising the thing? It just is not a particularly good model. So yeah. And so if it were me, I would, I would just focus on, no. We monitor, review, and evaluate the spill, That's it. So a question about is or should the budget of the SILC be public?
Well, I mean, in the state of Kansas, the SILC falls under the Open Records Act. So, you know, it's not like I have it on my website or anything, but if somebody were to ask for it, I would definitely provide it. I don't know why you'd want to hide it. I really don't. I feel like everybody needs to be super accountable, super transparent. You just save yourself so much headache that way. So I don't know why you would want to hide it. I would definitely give it to anybody.
Yeah, this is, so just to give folks a sense, so we're kind of at the 10-minute warning, and there's a few different kind of questions. So I'm going to sort of take some, so like Ian's talking about SILs and SILCs working together in supporting grassroots community organizing, civil disobedience. And then there's sort of this discussion about the collaboration with youth empowerment academies. And then similarly, this, to me, I'm going to lump these all together. The value of SILC being a 501c3 if the council members, you know, aren't providing services and things like that. I mean, because I do think, I mean, all of these questions, I mean, really kind of, to me, go to the same kind of place, you know, which is back to sort of the title is like, sort of what is it, you know, that SILs think that our SILC, you know, is there for or should be doing, and how do we sort of work all of that out? I mean, and I think the answer is, you know, that we've got the things, right? We've got the black and white things, we've got the shall things, and then in the universe of the may things, what centers need to remember is that what the SILC is going to do is what the spill, you know, sort of, you know, outlines. You know, the SILC is going to monitor, evaluate, and that's going to be sort of their guiding star. But their guiding star is also sort of what their council or what the board of directors, just like for SILs, what my board of directors tells me to do in terms of policy. Where do I turn my eyes to? You know, so a SILC having a 501c3 is important, could be important because the spill and or the board or the council of that SILC may have said, look, you know, we really want you to help with resource development up to and including, you know, the you know, locating, you know, supervising, superintending. I mean, and that some SILCs do that. I mean, that's one of the biggest things to recognize is that there really isn't uniformity amongst what SILCs do. And so, you know, and so, for example, you know, the SILC in Kansas, when Shannon was our executive director, and in its initial iteration, the board that it had and the priorities that the SILC had at that point in time were very much focused on providing kind of the policy advocacy that was working hand in hand with our community organizing. And that was, I mean, you know, and that temperature is determined by what the spill says and what the board says. And as centers, we're not divorced from that process because we can be part of developing that spill, as well as we can serve on the board, and or we can attend those meetings, and we can help develop, you know, sort of the priorities and the flavor of that Center for Independent, or of the statewide Independent Living Council, and how we see their role, you know, as much as anything. Once we've got the shalls and we're into the maze, right? You know, it's all about that universe of how have we influenced that spill? How are we promoting, you know, cooperation and mutual goals? And how are we actively participating in getting those things done? That's, I guess.
And I think a big thing is that keeping your SILC in the loop on the advocacy issues that the centers are working on, it helps the SILC be able to then make that as an advocacy priority for the SILC as well. But you got to keep them in the loop. It can't be this, we're going to hide everything we're doing from the SILC. And I'm very fortunate, again, in Kansas, that I have the centers do that. They do keep me in the loop. So that has helped quite a bit.
Well, and this is Amy. I mean, and to that point, so when Kathy was talking about sort of the funding formulas, when CARES Act funding came down, thank you very much to folks for helping with that. There were a certain number of centers in Kansas who, because they don't receive any Part C funds, they didn't get anything. And so to us, it was a very natural thing to turn to Kathy, to turn to the statewide independent living council and ask, I mean, obviously we're making it our own advocacy priority, but as somebody who can come in and sort of have their arms around, folks, depending on if you're Part C, Part B, blended, funded, whatever, can you help us carry that water and try to move that forward with our DSE and find some funds for those centers. Steve was asking about the federal funding, and as simply as I can put it, Stevie, funding is allocated on the basis of population for the counties that are served by that center. And then how Kathy finds board members, I have no idea.
Boy, I think every board struggles with this. Again, having a good relationship with the centers has made it easier because now I am starting to get referrals from the centers on people they think would be good, effective board members. I always ask the centers because they may have a consumer that they know wants to become more involved, and that's always wonderful. If they have employees that are retiring or leaving or doing something else, that's always an excellent board member to have. They know the community, so they'll know other people out there, but honestly, it's word of mouth. I've sent the letters, I've sent the requests to, every single organization in Kansas, and I never get response back on those. So it's always word of mouth. I always push my board members that this is one of their responsibilities. It quite honestly shouldn't be up to the staff of the SILC, because then you just have that staff picking who their boss is. And I don't ever think that. I've seen that go so wrong. I worked at a center who did that, and it was one of the worst experiences ever because they didn't get the right people. They just chose their friends. And I don't think that's what a SILC board should be. So I always encourage the SILC board. They need to be out there recruiting people in the different aspects of what they're doing. So, but again, the CILs are helping. We have the Kansas Disability Caucus in Kansas, and I just got a referral from a person who is working on that, and he's obviously a perfect member for the board, so he's going through the application process, but that's how we do it.
Well, and then Mona mentions in the chat, former DD council members, are fantastic, and yeah, and Kathy's right. There's a lot of sort of cross pollination, shall we say. So I don't know, we're sort of closing in on an hour. It went fast. Sorry for talking so fast. But I think probably, again, just getting back to sort of my core values on this is that, if you look around the country, it's very easy to say, why isn't our SILC doing this? Like, why don't we have this amazing SILC that's doing all of this, resource development or whatever? Why don't we? And the reality is that those SILCs are the partnership that we as Centers for Independent Living make them. And, just as our services are consumer directed on an individual basis, and our priorities as a center are consumer directed, so are our SILCs. And so is that relationship. And so it's critically important that we sort of honor that and hold that up, and that we learn to work our way through that, so that really, literally, we can have a plan, not an accident. We can have concerted effort statewide that promotes community integration and the services and supports that people with disabilities everywhere in our state can have access to. That's what it comes down to. So, yeah. Kathy?
I think the one thing I want to just say really quick here is that the relationships have to be respected. Again, the SILC is autonomous, and we're autonomous from the DSE, but we're autonomous from anybody else too. So I think that the relationship aspect of it is huge. Respect it. You guys are peers, SILC, DSE. Everybody's a peer. Nobody's above, below, anything like that. If you can all agree upon that, I think that a lot of stuff can get done. And I think we're there. We did it. Done.
All right, thank you, Kathy and Amy. Just a reminder to those who are in attendance, there will be a survey link dropped in the chat box. It is also available on the conference website, so please take your evaluation survey.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you.
guys.